Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me here again on Putting the Horse First. In this episode, I had a conversation with Jill Willis about Paddock Paradise horse care systems. Described in an article that she wrote for the Horsemanship Journal, Paddock Paradise is a term and a concept used to describe a natural and humane way to keep happy and healthy horses, which is based upon the lives of wild, free-roaming horses in the U.S. Great Basin. The premise is to provide a natural boarding model of safe, humane living conditions, which uses the horse's natural instincts to stimulate and facilitate their movement and other behaviors that are essential to a mentally and physically sound horse. So if you are interested in track systems or Paddock Paradise systems, or if you've never heard of them before and you want to know what they're all about, then this podcast episode is for you. If you have feedback at the end of the episode and you would like to tell me what you think, or you have more questions, please reach out to me at Putting the Horse First. That's first, number one, ST, at gmail.com. And I hope you enjoy this episode. The internet can be a blessing and a curse in that way. All I know is that it exists, and I see them online, and they look really cool. I had a friend who ran a boarding barn for 10 years, and they had one. Her feedback was that the horses were on the track. They had a central area with some grass. They would put them on the grass area, but everybody went in muzzles because invariably everyone was they were all very well fleshed out. And her feedback was that it was more work than either stalls or fields, because you still have to go out there and pick the track. Like they can't just leave the manure there. So she thought it was definitely more work. And then as I thought of, just the idea, I was like, well, let's do a track system. And then I'm walking around up there in the woods and I'm going, this is actually not going to be easy. Like, this is going to be expensive. Even if we do like polywire fencing, it's going to be about $20,000 worth of fencing if I have a professional fencing company come and install it. I've got, I think, what's roughly about a 1,300 foot path. So calculating
how much acreage, roughly? About how much acreage will that
it
go
should
around?
Be about 4 acres. People had suggested that we just fence the perimeter, but honestly, there's holes from water and so much deadfall, I would not let the horses just wander loose around it. It is, and there's a lot of pine, and dead pine trees are like spears. I was like, yeah, we can't let the horses just loose in the whole thing. That's not a good idea. So we're going to have to clear a track that's a safe area. Then I did some research on YouTube, which made me feel a lot better when I realized you could hire people with power equipment to come in and chew up a lot, especially the stuff that's fallen down. We got a lot of dead trees laying down, a lot.
Yeah, which isn't the worst thing to have a few dead trees for the horses to, have to go over, because, it just gives them something to go over, gives them something kind of, breaks up the monotony. But at the same time, you don't want the ones that are, dangerous, I guess.
Gotcha. Yes. No, I've seen some people have some fancy tracks out there. There are some, they've embraced the paradise part of the Paddock Paradise. And they get a little herb bar, and you got the water buffet. I think it's especially cool. So many people have retired horses that really don't do much. Like they don't ride, or they never ride, or they retired them. Even if you work them an hour a day doing clicker training on the ground or something, it's still 23 hours a day that they're just kind of living out in their habitat, not doing much else.
I think also just on that point, I just want to comment, because even people that ride a lot, they probably are not spending more than, unless they're doing, big endurance. Most people are, if they're riding, whether in an arena or on the trail, I would say even 3 hours a day is probably far more than the average person does if they're a regular riding person. So let's just say that even if we were going to be generous and say 4 hours a day, which I think is unlikely, but maybe, that's still leaving a horse 20 hours a day without that person around. For some horses, that means they're standing in a paddock 20 hours a day. If a horse is in its kind of prime sort of riding ages, a paddock paradise in its intent is really designed a way to have a horse, like you don't have to pull your horse out of the barn and lunge it before you ride because they are always ready.
Gotcha.
They just exercise to some degree 24/7 because of their lifestyle, because of the environment. And so it really eliminates a lot of time. And it's interesting when people say it's so much more work. I mean, I think about the days of shoveling shavings out of a stall and then, and then carrying a wheelbarrow full of shavings to like a big muck pile. When Jamie Jackson and I had a track out in California together that we operated together, we were on sort of a hillside, so we could either, just toss the manure out, or we would put it in a manure spreader, or we were fortunately in a pretty dry, environment that was not quite this, it was not an equivalent to their adaptive habitat, but it was getting really close without being an adaptive habitat. It was very dry, not quite high desert, but close. And so a lot of the manure does just in the sunshine, it really just gets dry, dusty, and dissipates. Now, when I was in Minnesota, manure does not do that. Might do it one month out of the year, but otherwise, if you don't move the manure off of a track, you basically have a track full of manure because, and then you've just got, being in sort of a wet climate. New England would be probably similar to Minnesota. You have snow for months, and then you have rain, and then you have sunshine and rain alternating. So maybe in the fall you have some drier weather. But I do think that, most tracks really do need to have the manure. The longest track I've ever seen was one out in Virginia, in Norfolk, Virginia. It was 14 miles long.
Oh, wow.
And they had they had a couple of loops off the track. So that if the horses, kind of say they went like 2 miles and then they could kind of loop around and go back the way they came. But the whole thing was 14 miles. It was on 1,000 acres and it was incredible. But
that is pretty amazing. How many horses did they have on that?
They had about 15.
Oh, I was thinking they had 100. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was a private property and they just had their 15 horses. But it was interesting because when I first went out there, all the horses were laminitic. So it was the sort of equine manager who was trying to wrap her brain around how to hear the horses should have the best of the best, and yet they're all laminitic. Their hooves are falling apart.
So on that length track, even with a track, you could possibly have too much grass for 15 horses.
Well, no, this was before that. This was when I went out there to help them design a track for the property. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so that was why they first got into this, was because they were trying to find a way to deal with horses that spring from laminitis. And so they surfaced it and,
oh, wow.
And the horses were doing fine. So it was really just seems like everybody's led for some reason, whether it's just wanting to better the horses' lives, they stumble across it. There was a guy in our natural hoof care training program many years ago that said, I think a lot of people are just waiting to discover this. And I couldn't agree more, because I think some people are resistant to the idea of doing anything different from what they've been doing for the past 35, 40 years. And other people just hear about it. And I know for myself, back in 2006, it was like light bulbs started going off. And I couldn't believe, I'd never really given any thought to what the horse's natural habitat was in relation to how we keep them ourselves, because I was very interested in what zoos were doing to try to enrich the habitats of the horses, or the animals they had on display. But I had horses, and I was more and more not putting them in stalls at night. I would bring them in the evening to feed them, any hard feed, and in the mornings. But for the most part, I was just letting them, I had kind of turned my barn into a run-in, and just had 3 stall doors that just stayed open. And I had some fans in there in the summer, so they had a place to kind of beat the heat. But I just didn't feed them in there unless it was just, this was in Minnesota. So if it was an absolutely, miserable, severely cold day, like 55 mile an hour wind chill kind of,
How did you wind up living in Minnesota? Were you working there? You had a job there?
I lived there. I went to school there. I moved there with my family when I was in junior high school, went to high school and college there. And about 4 years after I graduated from college, I ended up taking a job in New York and lived there for several years. And then by coincidence, I was offered a job. I had a client who lived in Minnesota and was offered a job to come to work with his company full time. And so moved back to Minnesota. And then throughout my whole time in Minnesota, I spent a lot of time in California, again, just, for work purposes. And so in 2008, I moved out to the Central Coast area of California. And this was about a year and a half after I had gone through a natural hoof care training program, which originally I just planned to do for my own horses, just wanting it to be a little bit more affordable because the person who was doing it in my area, who was very good, charged a lot of money. And I just couldn't see paying close to $1,000 a month to have my horses trimmed every 4 or 5 weeks. So I thought, well, I'll just learn how to, if she can do it, I could do it, is kind of my thought. And it took me a minute to figure out the right one. And fortunately, I did end up finding one that was designed and taught AA and HCP, which was actually a nonprofit that Jamie Jackson had created back in 2002. And then over time, it was removed from the nonprofit and created a separate entity. And the nonprofit still exists, but it doesn't do any formal training or anything like that.
No, I did. I took some some of the best money I ever spent taking some hoof trimming clinics in the early 2000s. My current horse, I had trimmed him myself for the first 2 years that I had him, because when I first got him, he would put his belly on the floor. I have Farrier doing him now, just because when you only trim one horse, it's really hard to do because you don't get fit enough trimming horses.
Right. Your hands, your arms, your legs, they don't stay in it's a unique series of muscles. It's like a lot of times it is the horse owners who are most interested in natural horse care, which Paddock Paradise is a part of. Mm-hmm. Whereas the people that have been working in the horse industry, sometimes they're the slowest to come around to making those changes. I think one, it's inconvenient which is really the whole way that stalls were created in the first place, for human convenience. And then out of that became the necessity of trying to figure out how to keep their hooves together. And then so many things were created to treat symptoms that came about as a result of this convenience, for the humans. I like to think that we're, starting to see a trend in the opposite direction, and hopefully we will be the norm at some point.
So when somebody reaches out to you and says they want a track system for their horse, where do you usually start them?
What I often do is suggest they do consultation on the phone, just to kind of get an idea of their property, because everybody's property is different. The first thing I suggest they do is get yourself a copy, check it out at the library, or order a copy of Paddock Paradise, because I think that when people understand the reason behind the concept, it really helps them to connect to the importance of the concept, that it's not just some wild idea that somebody came up with, but that it came directly out of wild horse country, observations and the way that they move and the way they live. So I think reading the book is really always my number one first recommendation. And I think that helps people get their head wrapped around it, because as the concept of track systems grow, many people have never heard of Paddock Paradise. It's a cute name, but it doesn't describe what it is. So Paddock Paradise, many people are confused about it until they actually read the book or understand the concept. And I think that's why the term track system has really replaced it. And then there's all these hybrids of, Equicentral and Paddock Trails and so on. But the people that have kind of come up with these other ideas, that's where they get further and further away from the actual, the genesis of the concept. The concept was created between a marriage of a client who had a laminitic horse, and the people didn't want their horse just confined to the sacrifice lot or the dirt lot or dirt paddock away from the company of other horses, but couldn't put it out on grass. That married with Jamie's 4+ years going in and out of wild horse country when he was doing his research project on the hooves, he just took in without necessarily a plan in mind, I would say, watched the way the horses traveled, the way they moved, the way they lived, etc., just as a result of his, time out there. So the idea of that single file aspect of movement, you build them a track and it's interesting because the paths they will make are about 18 inches.
If somebody wants to set up a track, so first, ideally, talk to a professional, then learn behind the concept. And then, so what should a person's third step be?
Well, I think the first step is not necessarily to talk to a professional because you really don't know what anybody's understanding of the concept is unless you read the book first. Because, some quote professionals have not read the book. They may have their own idea. It's just like in the horse world. Someone, says they're an expert. That doesn't necessarily, it's like, well, it's all relative because sometimes 45 years of doing all the wrong stuff does not make you an expert, even if you have been, in the industry. So anyway, I would say start with the book.
Okay.
And then I would suggest, trying to find somebody who has a track. And of course, social media now, I mean, I have the Paddock Paradise Facebook page, and then I have an Instagram page. There's other people that are, they post a lot of pictures of both their own personal tracks as well as the, boarding facility or liveries. So you can find a lot of those on social media and get pictures, which is great because it's nice to see what other people are doing, to get ideas. I think even on Pinterest, there's a lot of photographs of different, people who have posted, their paddock paradise. They'll post things about the, like how much mileage their horses, are, getting in a day, and just all the different, things that they've done. People will, we've all I started out with a tape, an electric tape, and then I moved from electric tape to I'm trying to think what I did. It seems like it was a couple of different kinds of electric tape. Ended up with an electric poly wire, and that seemed to be the most effective for keeping them out of the center. I remember one time just seeing my horse pick up the tape with his teeth, pull it up in the air, pull it out of the, out of the fence post, and then on into the center he went,
Problem solved.
Well, now I know. Yes, now I know. And so, and so I think the key is definitely, learning how to keep the electric fence, well charged, and then the horses just quit testing it. I got to the point that they very rarely went into the center because they had so much room to play and run around on the track that unless I was just going to be out there like doing stuff for like several hours, I might put them in the center, or like a lot of times that was a great time to, take some photos just if I wanted some of, sort of exaggerated playtime, a lot of galloping and running, but a lot of times they would gallop and run, just because, I was bringing, oats, out to the field in the evening, to feed them something. So anyway, so I would start with the book. I would, then start looking at, seeing if anybody has one in your area, or if, I mean, that was the one thing when we had the one in California, it was so nice because, people often would, kind of book an afternoon with us as a part of their visit to California. Which is the nice thing about it being in California, because a lot of people came from other parts of the world. We had people from Canada, from France, from Italy, from Spain, from, many other states around the country and so on. But it was just, because it was something they were going to be here anyway for some other reason. And then they would just, rent a car and drive up or just somehow work it out so that they could spend time. But,
Gotcha.
And then, there's magazine articles on it. There's lots of photos. There's a lot of social media sites. And then I think that, then it starts to, sort of come together with, what do you do with your horses and how do you, what's going to work for you, your property. If you're looking for property, I think some of the best property is what many realtors would say, not good for horses, because I think many realtors will think that a horse property is some big, flat, piece of acreage, that no hills, no nothing, just nice and flat. And in their mind, that's the very conventional sort of, perfect horse property versus, something that has sort of a big steep hill on it. And, depending on, or very forested, just et cetera. There's a lot of different, ways that you can use these, unusable, acreages, to create, a perfect environment for horses. Because if you think about going into wild horse country, I mean, it's very, very, hilly and mountainous and, they're moving and there's, if you see the pictures, no one's riding them and their muscle tone and, athleticism is, beyond what, most of us can ever dream of having in our own horses.
Yes.
And then I think it's also important just to, sort of walk your property, get to know, so many people will buy, a house that doesn't have a barn yet. Some people buy an equestrian property. So it really kind of depends. But if somebody's truly starting from scratch, and it's amazing, we had our property or our Paddock Paradise on leased properties. So that is definitely, an option. I think it's just a matter of, you have to sort of, get to know people in a community where you want to, where you want to live or where you want to have it. I had in Minnesota, I had a hay grower just 10-minute drive down the road from me. And he would come over and, cut and bale the hay that was in the center of my field.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
And so, the first summer that I had put in, the track in, I got 450 bales of grass off of my pasture. And so the very pasture that had caused my one horse to have laminitis 2 years earlier was, a beautiful, supply of grass hay, that I could put up in the barn and then just kind of add to the mix of, the other grass hay I was buying. So.
Gotcha. That's something that was new to me that I hadn't realized until I started looking into the stuff more. Is the idea that's being promoted now that grass is actually bad and we shouldn't let horses on grass, period. That was a new idea to me.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it was new to me back in 2005, but but if you've ever had a horse with laminitis, the vet's first recommendation is don't let them in the grass pasture.
Yep.
Keep them on dirt, and feed them hay. Grass pastures are definitely the high sugar, high carb pastures are definitely, one of the most common causes of,
for sure. Yeah.
Of acute laminitis or just chronic laminitis. You can often tell from looking at a horse, they may not be lame, but they certainly have the symptoms. And so it's certainly a ticking time bomb situation where it's just a matter of time before, sort of a subclinical or chronic can turn into an acute case.
I appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with me. And you do consultations for folks?
JamieJackson.com is where there's info on doing a consultation. There's also the official Paddock Paradise Facebook page. There's a Facebook group, and there's an Instagram page, all Paddock Paradise Official. The AANHCP.net, which stands for the Association for the Advancement of Natural Horse Care Practices, has a Paddock Paradise page. And there's also under articles, there's many, many different articles, published articles written by either Jamie Jackson, myself, or other practitioners that are posted there that are just for free. So if anybody's thinking about transitioning their horses from being shod to being barefoot, there is the recommended diet guidelines that you can get with a donation to it's a nonprofit. So with a donation of $20, we'll send you the diet guidelines. It's basically the diet we used for about 8 years on our horses. So it's tried and true. It takes into consideration if you have a laminitic horse, an underweight horse, or an overweight horse. It's all about what you can add or eliminate or quantities, etc. But, just trying to do what we can to help horses. So
awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good day.
Isabeau. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.